All right, looks like I am live here for our webinar number 3 in the No Meat Athlete 30-day Go Vegan Challenge. We are just about ready to enter week 3. Tomorrow, of course, is Labor Day if you're watching this live and you at least are in the U.S. or know what U.S. holidays are. So that's kind of a big food holiday for a lot of people, because not so much a big food holiday, but it's a big cookout holiday. So a big non-vegan, non-vegetarian food holiday for a lot of people, which means it brings with it a couple little challenges. But because we've talked about the reason that that we're not being super strict about avoiding the what you might call junk food at this time, the vegan junk food, the fake meats and things like that. It's not that hard to handle because you can rely on that sort of stuff. Once you move to more of a whole foods diet, it gets a little bit trickier and you have to be more creative. Or you can still just have these days now and then, which is what I do, where you still eat that stuff because it's fun. It reminds you of just the things you used to be able to do at parties like that. And I mean, for some people, they want to cut all associations to eating animals ever, and that's cool. But for me and for a lot of other people, it's kind of nice to be able to do kind of like what you used to do without actually harming any animals. So that's really the very simple way to handle that. I would imagine that there might be some people who want to just wait one more day, because this is another crucial week, right? We're going from if you were on the omnivore to vegan plan, then this is going from being not quite vegetarian, because you can still eat fish, to going vegetarian basically all the way, which is a big step, right? So because we're really inflexible here, or we're very flexible, we're not rigid. If you wanted to say I'm gonna hang out one more day at this phase 2 and go to week 3 the next day after Labor Day is over, that's fine with me. But I think if you want to really do it right and kind of stick to the schedule that you committed to, then I would suggest just bring some sort of veggie dogs or something to the barbecue. So that's really all there is to say about Labor Day. I mean, it's just not that hard when you can have such a close substitute as a fake meat product. And if not, bring whatever you want. Bring the quinoa salad, or who knows, whatever will make you happy. That's still on our plan. Go for it. So let's see, housekeeping stuff. Let me know if you can hear and see me. This is a weird situation. I'm in a different place than usual because I'm not going to bore you with my housing stories and disasters, but we had another one when we tried to move back into our house that had been mold infested while we were gone for 6 weeks, because we had a big, or I should say 4 weeks, because we had a big leak here, which was a disaster. Went to move back in after being assured that it was safe, and it turned out that there was mold on the walls. So it was not safe. So we have nowhere to live right now, basically. And I thought I could come back here just to get into my office, which is a spot that was mold-free. Turns out that has all been blocked off and filled with junk drums and guitars and things to protect them from the mold. So I can't get in there. So I'm in a weird spot right now. So I apologize that it is a different setup and not the best one for video and audio by any means. I think it's a little bit echoey. I'm right in front of these glass doors, which is sort of weird, but I guess as it gets darker, maybe it'll be less weird. I don't know. Good. Thank you. So Denise can hear and see me. I appreciate that, Denise. Thank you for the feedback. Hope it sounds reasonably not that echoey. So anyway, we are talking today about food and nutrition. And when I say food, of course, very, very broad category, right? You could say that any of these webinars we've done are about food. This one, we're talking about what you should be eating. And the first part of that is going to be kind of from a practical standpoint, what does a day look like? And where might you find some recipes and things like that? The reason I really wanted to do this one this week instead of what the other one that I still know people want to hear is, which is what to do in social situations, how to handle things with friends and family, how to maybe cook for someone who doesn't want to eat the way you do but lives with you, or let's see, out of restaurants, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with traveling? All these kind of inconvenience, potentially weird situations. How do you handle all those? That'll be next week. But this week, because so many people on the omnivore to vegan are jumping to vegetarian at this point, I wanted to talk about what to eat, because I think for a lot of people, up to this point, you've been able to fall back on familiar meals, right? Like maybe you've never eaten vegetarian meals with any consistency. So the first week you had to get rid of the beef and pork. Easy, because you could just eat chicken and turkey. It wasn't very difficult to do that. But the next week, this past week, it was give up the chicken and turkey, so left with just fish. So a little bit weirder meals, but still, pasta with shrimp or just grilled tuna. I mean, people are used to eating these types of meals. This week we're going to vegetarian, and for a good number of people listening or watching this, it's quite likely that you've never gone even a vegetarian day. I mean, I would imagine most people here interested in something like this program have done something like that before, maybe even been fully vegetarian or partially vegetarian for a long time. But because it's such a weird week, I did want to talk about food, some of the practical things, what types of things should you be eating? And then in the second part of this, we'll talk about kind of more approaching an ideal. So this first part is kind of about practicality. I'll let you know what I do on a given day and some variations around that. And then we'll talk about nutrition, which is kind of the reasons why I choose these kinds of foods. But I don't expect anyone who's not ready to jump to optimal nutrition yet to do that, right? And I mean, and it's not to say that I'm eating optimal nutrition, right? I'm always on a path to trying to do better. So keep in mind, at this phase, it's not important to me, or for the purposes of this challenge, that you are eating in a particularly healthy manner, right? I mean, my hope is that you're going to be mixing in some healthy meals, and that even if your dinners are still somewhat indulgent, the breakfast might start to become healthy because you're going to start doing a smoothie or something, or you'll start eating more salads, who knows, and improving your health in some ways. But it's totally fine if for a while you're eating the stuff that isn't all that healthy, the fake meats and things like that. Because if that's what you need to get here to this path that ultimately is going to become much, much healthier, then that's great. Then go for it. I don't have a problem with that at all. And in fact, I encourage it. So if you have any questions about these topics at all, as I'm talking about them, you can jump in with questions. It's fine. I cannot guarantee that I'm going to answer them right then, but if they are super on topic and exactly just like a clarification of what I'm talking about, or a small tangent extension of what I'm talking about, I'll take them right down and answer them. If not, if they're related to food, but just a little bit not quite on the exact thing I'm talking about, so as not to interrupt, I will just save them till later. But by all means, I'll still see them, so submit them whenever you feel like it. And keep that in mind, that these things are for your questions. We've had a good turnout so far. We've had people participating a lot, asking lots of questions, which is wonderful. But just want to keep that up and remind you that these are for your questions. So by all means, get them in while you're here. Okay, so let's talk about a typical day. A lot of people want to know about meal planning, and they want to know about typical days. As we've said before, there's no actual meal plan in this challenge, as of course you've noticed by now if you've actually been trying to follow the week-to-week changes. And that's because we want you to be eating food that's really similar to what you're used to eating, right? I don't want to give you some thing that is what I eat and says, here, eat these 3 meals and 2 snacks every day, and then be totally unfamiliar to you. That would completely defeat the purpose of the small steps and the gradually easing into what we're doing. So that's why there's no meal plan. We are coming out with a No Meat Athlete meal plan product, which will have a month or possibly more than that of exact meals that say, here's what to eat this day, here's what to eat this next day, so on and so on, with wiggle room and stuff. That'll probably be out early next month, early in October. So you'll see it if you're on the No Meat Athlete list and all that. But what I want to do is talk to you about what a typical day looks like for me and a lot of others. Doug and I did a podcast about this topic recently and found that our typical days, even though we didn't plan it, were very similar. Because while there's lots of room for variety, I think, I don't know, it's just not that different. There aren't that many different ways to eat. I mean, of course, there's fruitarian, there's stuff that is really, really different from what's normal. But if you're kind of staying sort of close to mainstream is not the right word, but what is typical in the way our culture eats in the United States, if you're doing like the vegan version of that, but a very healthy one, I think there's not all that much different food. So when I get to the specifics, you'll understand what I'm saying. I think that it's not weird food by any means. And I was going to say something else about typical days, and I have lost my train of thought about that. But that's okay. I'll just move on and get started here. So for me, and this could be for anyone else too, if you want more specifics about any of this, just chime in, and I'll let you know. And by the way, there is a podcast episode where we go into even more detail about specifics of our days. If you look up No Meat Athlete Radio on iTunes, you will find that. Oh, I know what I was going to say. That this week I'm going to publish to the membership site, and I'll email you when I do. Which is our to clarify. That's the 30-day challenge site that you can log in and see. I'll put like a 3-day meal plan up, like what I would recommend with specific actual meals that I'll link to from different places. Could be No Meat Athlete, could be other websites. Which I would always have the kind of meals that I just so you can get a picture, not with the goal of you following this 3-day meal plan for any amount of time other than 3 days or even that, but just so you can see what it's like when you actually plug in real meals in there. So typical start to any day for me used to be, for the very longest time, was a smoothie. Smoothie that was made out of fruits, nuts and seeds, some vegetables, water, and ice, and that was really it. If you look at No Meat Athlete, there's something called the perfect smoothie formula. So Google No Meat Athlete perfect smoothie formula. You will find kind of the framework that I use to make a typical smoothie. Let's see, just to give you a few specifics, I put a nut mix in there that I kind of start, and I have a Blendtec blender. Vitamix blender would do the job just as well, and maybe even some of the cheaper ones. If you don't have one of those good ones, they're definitely a good investment, but you don't need it to make a diet like this work, of course. But eventually they become a really good investment. They do kind of pay for themselves by saving you money on food. But anyway, what I put in my smoothie each morning, and it's not like super strict on ingredients, but for me, my wife, and my 2 kids who are small, they don't drink a whole lot of smoothie, but they'll drink 6-8 ounces each. We use like a tablespoon or a few tablespoons of flax seeds, which is good for omega-3s. 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, handful of walnuts, and some pumpkin seeds. And each of these nuts is a pretty good thing. The walnuts have some good omega-3 content. Chia seeds also omega-3s, decent protein, and the pumpkin seeds are in there for the iron content. That's kind of the main reason we include those. All of these things are raw because if you cook them, you're going to be losing some of the benefits. So these are all totally raw nuts that go in there. And then some handfuls of frozen fruits, as I'll get to when I get to the nutrition. Berries, nuts, and seeds are some of the most important foods I think you could eat. So to get those all in the smoothie right away is a really good start. And then I'll throw in whatever greens we have around that aren't too strongly flavored. I don't like the flavor of greens in my smoothie that much, but something like spinach is very neutral tasting. You really can't notice it in a smoothie, assuming you don't put tons and tons of it in. So what we do is anytime our greens are starting to go bad that we use for salads or anything else, once they just are hinting at not being quite as good as they once were, we move them to the freezer, which kind of locks in the freshness where they are. They stop going any worse after that. And then we throw those in our smoothies throughout the week. And I don't mean that we're eating rotten spinach by any means. If it's rotten, I'm getting rid of it. But before it gets there, move it to the freezer and throw that in there. And you start with just a little bit. Gradually, you better include more, especially as your taste buds change, but also as you just get used to the taste of a smoothie like this. And you can start to put in more and more of those vegetables. Could be spinach, could be a different green, doesn't have to be that. Kale works fine too, a little bit bitter. Maybe you can't use that much of it before it starts tasting like vegetables, but a lot of people do kale smoothies and love them. So anyway, that's the morning. Oh, and a couple bananas I'll put in there too, usually 2 bananas for 4 people. And that's it. That's the smoothie. More recently, I have basically been eating a deconstructed smoothie for breakfast. So there's nothing special about the smoothie except that it's very palatable, right? It's a very kind of easy, tasty thing to eat for breakfast, especially if you're coming from breakfast that isn't so tasty, that isn't vegan friendly at all. And you're kind of thinking, okay, vegan breakfast, that's going to be difficult to make, or vegetarian breakfast, what's going to possibly be good in there? Smoothie, I don't know. A lot of people like smoothies. They like the taste of that. They can appreciate why someone would enjoy the taste of a smoothie, particularly if there aren't too many vegetables in it. So by all means, begin that way. You don't have to put greens in your smoothie if that weirds you out. Just throw some nuts and seeds in there. Make sure you have a good blender that will chop them all up. If you don't, you can grind the nuts and seeds ahead of time in the blender or in like a coffee grinder. You don't want chunks. If you get chunks in there, it kind of makes it unappetizing. So smoothie's great for that, but if you could just eat the fruits and the nuts and the seeds themselves and the spinach, I mean, some people do eat breakfast salads. If you could do that, I think it's even better because it's less processed, right? The blender does in some way process it, does some of the work of breaking it down for you. You'll probably take in more total calories if you were drinking in a smoothie than if you had to actually sit there and chew the food. Our bodies have that built into them, right? The mechanism of how much work is this to chew. The less work it is to chew, the more you're going to eat of it. So if it's in its natural state meant to be chewed, I say you're better off doing it that way. But you don't need to even think about that while you're transitioning. Just go with the smoothie. It's easy. It tastes good. And over time, if you want, you can graduate to just eating the vegetables, handful of nuts and seeds maybe, or even a salad. And breakfast salad with kind of a sweeter dressing, that is something that people do. And once you've had a little bit, it really becomes pretty good. It's not that weird once you get used to it. Kind of light tasting, and breakfast, I don't know, I think can be pretty light tasting. So that's breakfast for me. Usually later in the morning before lunchtime, I'm eating some kind of snack. And by the way, this is how my day is. It's like the 3 main meals: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then 2 moderate-sized snacks in between breakfast and lunch, and then in between lunch and dinner. So one snack in each of those windows. For snacks, a lot of times it's just fruit. Again, could be some nuts and seeds if I have that on hand and I want that. Not usually seeds, but trail mix, and there might be some seeds built into a trail mix. But a lot of times in the morning, it's kind of when I'm hungry for something that's more like bready or grains. And that's, if I start the day with this totally, by the way, that smoothie was totally raw. If I've started the day that way, kind of depending sometimes on how the day is going and how the weather is and how I'm feeling, I sometimes want something that is more cooked, a little bit more, filling, satisfying. And in that case, I'll eat like a pita, maybe dipped in hummus or with some peanut butter or almond butter on there. Something like that, a whole wheat pita, just toast for a few minutes and then spread whatever you want on it. And if it's something that is just, hummus, I consider very healthy. Nut butters, I consider healthy. If you're losing weight, a lot of this is changing a little. If you're trying to lose weight, some of this changes because you don't want calorically dense foods. And sometimes nut butters can kind of tip the scales there a little bit. In addition to because they're blended up for you, again, they're easier to eat. You can eat lots more nut butter than you could just nuts themselves. But anyway, that's kind of a snack that I'll do a lot in the mid-morning. Then lunch for me, very often, especially when I'm doing well or when it's warm out, is just a giant salad with about a half a can of beans on it. Chickpeas are one of my favorites, and a tahini-based dressing. So I don't eat oil at home anymore. So, and I'll explain that when I get to the nutrition part, why I don't do that. But nothing wrong with that for you or for the purposes of the challenge. By any means, go for it. Eat oil on your salad, in your salad dressing, if that's what makes a salad palatable to you. But you can make some pretty good ones. If you go to Whole Foods Much, they have an oil-free tahini garlic dressing that is really, really good. If you Google just things like tahini garlic dressing or tahini-based salad dressings, you'll find some really good ones. They still have some fat in them because the fat's from the tahini. But tahini is nothing more than ground sesame seeds, so it is very whole as a food. It's not like oil where it's kind of been extracted from the other foods. So that's a very typical lunch. If I'm not doing that, though, then I'm eating leftovers from the previous night's dinner. That's something we do a lot with 2 kids. We go through a lot of food, and very often the simplest thing to do is just make a double batch of whatever our dinner is, so that we know we'll have lunch made tomorrow. Let's see. So I'll get to some dinner ideas and things like that because those often serve as lunch, but I'll tell you about those when I get to dinner. Let's see. Afternoon, usually I'm doing some sort of workout in the afternoon. That's my time to do it. If you're working out in the morning, of course, this is going to shift around. But before and after that workout is when I usually have things that are sweeter or simpler carbohydrate. So it could be something like white rice or even white bread if I happen to have like a loaf of French bread or something around. Around workouts is the time to eat that sort of stuff. Mostly, though, for me, it's fruit juice. Tart cherry juice is something that I use a lot and like a lot. But any kind of fruit juice will do. Could be just some whole dates. Could be some bananas. Just a little bit of fruit. I'm not trying to count calories or anything like that. Just eating enough to feel some energy before this workout. And then afterwards, I'll just do something very similar. If it's a tough workout, then I'll do a different workout strategy. But if it's a typical basic daily workout, afterwards, I'll just have maybe a little bit more juice, a little more fruit, and that works perfectly well for a workout. Let's see. Other afternoons, if it's not like a workout afternoon, I'll probably do something like, again, kind of more the starchier stuff. Ezekiel bread is a type of bread that is sprouted, and they make lots of sprouted grain bread-like products. We use that for our kids because they're always eating almond butter sandwiches, so we figured let's at least give them some sprouted grain bread. And this is me showing my vegan weirdness now because you certainly don't have to eat sprouted grain bread to be vegan. But as we started looking into breads and things like that more, found that made sense for us, seemed healthier, less starch, more vitamins and things like that because it's kind of converting the grain into a plant and when you do that sprouting process to it. So, I might have an almond butter sandwich on that if it's like a big afternoon snack, but nothing too big. And then dinner time, right? So dinner comes around 5, 6 o'clock with the kids. And a few different ideas. I've written down some of the common things I've eaten here, because I always get asked this question, like, what is your typical dinners? And I always have trouble thinking of what they actually are. But I try to think of, like, what are the categories they fall into, and then I'll give you a few places where to find the recipes for these types of things. Probably our most common thing is pasta with sauce that has beans and vegetables in it, and that's the difference between this and between junk food pasta. When I eat pasta, I'm almost 99% of the time eating whole wheat pasta or some kind of alternative grain pasta. So it could be quinoa pasta, could be spelt pasta, which is just another form of older wheat. But it's always whole wheat, never the white pasta. I wouldn't eat that stuff unless it was immediately before a workout or race, and even then, probably wouldn't do it. Or very, very special, out at a restaurant or traveling in Italy or something where you're kind of not thinking about health at that time, but just eating what's good. Beans are very, very typical in Italian dishes, actually in pasta dishes. So it sounds kind of weird to put beans in your pasta sauce to Americans, but in Italy, it's not a rare thing at all. Chickpeas work very well. I like them in pasta sauces. But there are others, fava beans and other kinds of beans people sometimes put with pastas. A lot of Italian recipes you can very easily make vegan if you get like a Mario Batali book. And I think mine is called Molto Italiano, or I don't think it's Molto Mario, but Molto, I think it's Molto Italiano. And it's just a Mario Batali book, and we just use basically almost all of the recipes. Not that they're all vegan, but if you remove the cheese from them, a lot of them become vegan. Obviously, you're ignoring the ones that have meat in them. But there are a lot that, a lot of Italian cooking, if you get rid of the cheese, you're good, because they don't usually use butter to cook stuff in. Not often. Sometimes they do, but it's not hard. There are actually some good vegan Italian books that I don't have myself yet, but I'd like to get. I'll mention one of those in a minute. Okay, so pasta, beans, big one for us. Beans and rice, very typical dish. We don't eat it. I mean, when I think of beans and rice, I'm thinking of Latin American style beans and rice. That's more specific than what I would usually eat for dinner. Sometimes we'll do the kind of Latin American flavored version of it, but other times it might be lentils and rice and have Indian spices on it. So it might be more of an Indian style beans and rice, but the combination of beans and rice is a good one. Stir fries, could be Thai, could be Chinese, but basically usually stir frying tofu and some vegetables, serving it over rice. That works very well, or rice noodles. Very, very simple. There are plenty of recipes out there like that. You don't have to use oil to make the stir fry, by the way. You can sometimes bake the tofu. There are lots of different methods, and you can find these when you look up different recipes. We'll do pizza fairly often, and to do that, most of the time is being served with a homemade cashew cheese that we do that is very, very simple. You just soak some cashews, some raw cashews, soak them for maybe 4 hours in water, and then use a high-speed blender to turn them into a cheesy kind of sauce spread. Now, I don't actually bake that sauce. Let that be raw and just pour that on top of a baked pizza, whole wheat crust, homemade sometimes store-bought, with usually tomato sauce that we've made at home very simply. I realize these are very general, broad things here. I'm not giving you recipes or anything like that because that's not the point. I want to give you the ideas of the types of meals that I eat and that I kind of recommend people who are on the journey like you are yourselves, because these are not weird things, right? People are used to eating pasta, maybe not always with beans in it, but it's not, if you go to an authentic Italian restaurant, it would not be weird to have a pasta with the beans there, or pasta with white beans or chickpeas. Very, very common is that sort of thing. Beans and rice, of course, we've all heard of that sort of thing. Stir fry, this is not weird food. It's just that you can make it vegan very easily, so that's what we end up eating. Pizza, of course, another normal food. Soups, stews, and chilies, things like that are so simple to make. They usually have very, very little active time required, which is why I love them. And you can freeze the leftovers, make a double or triple or quadruple batch of a big stew, freeze the leftovers, and then you can do it in like individual bags or individual containers so that you've got really quick, easy dinner in a pinch. Next time, all you need to do is defrost it and you're set. So I can talk to you about where to find some of those in a minute. And then finally, tacos and burritos, just what we do very often, because they're delicious, right? I mean, what else do you need? They're simple. You can make things as simple as you could saute some tofu or bake some tofu, add in some beans, get some healthy Amy's brand barbecue sauce or Annie's, whatever, I don't know the name, but a barbecue sauce that is natural if you're not going to make your own, which is also an option, of course. Do that, saute some onions and peppers. Again, no oil needed. throw it in a burrito shell, and you have a nice, really lunch. Or nice dinner, which can become lunch the next day. So again, very, very familiar, well-loved food. There's a delicious taco recipe in a book I'll tell you about right now from Isa Chandra Moskowitz that is called Appetite for Reduction. Just delicious. I mean, it's so good. It has zucchini, black beans, green salsa, and this little whipped up vegan kind of, I don't know what it would be called, like a creamy, lemony garlic sauce that you serve over the tacos. Just really, really good. So I hope the point is clear that this stuff isn't crazy food. I mean, this is really normal stuff, very, very easy to eat and enjoy and love. And you can serve this to other people. And like, sure, if someone is coming over and they're a hardcore meat eater, it's going to be a little weird for them to eat this food that doesn't have meat in it, right? They'll feel like it's not a meal. They'll feel like they need to go eat afterwards because they didn't, even not physically at all, but psychologically. And I get this because I used to have it. There's this hang up of like, if I don't have meat in my meal, then it just wasn't really, it doesn't count as my dinner. And I don't know what we think is going to happen, if we think it's unhealthy or we think we're going to get tired or just be hungry. But people will have that hang up. But they're not going to say your food was weird or wasn't good. And I think that's, to me, that's a pretty good result, right? I like to serve people really good vegan food, and I hope that they'll say more than just that's not weird or that was okay. You know, I hope they really do like it, because that's my goal. I'm not trying to change the way people eat when they come over, but I want them to see that, hey, wow, this is actually pretty normal. Maybe I could eat that way and it wouldn't totally make my life suddenly go haywire and be weird, right? That's the message that I like to convey to people about this whole thing. Hopefully you've started to notice that as you've done this challenge. Okay, so where do you get recipes for these things like I mentioned, all these different meals? So I don't personally like make up a lot of recipes. I've gotten much, much better at it as I've learned to cook. But for a long time, really, all I did was cook from books. That was what I did. Still, it's probably what I do 70% of the time, is cook from recipes where it tells you exactly what to do. Once you get better at it, you can kind of start making modifications very easily so that you can get any cookbook you want. And I mean, granted, if it does make a steak, you're not going to find an easy substitute for that that is good as a dinner. But if you look up a pasta recipe or you look up a soup recipe or whatever, you can figure out how to quickly change the butter into oil. Not change it into oil. We're not doing miracles here, but use oil instead of butter. You know, throw some beans in where the meat was or where something else was. Who knows? It's just not that hard once you get used to it. But so what I want to say there is, I'm not trying to discourage you from using regular cookbooks, right? Like for the longest time when I first went vegetarian, I used Rachel Ray's book. I think it's called 365 No Repeats. And that's the book that I learned to cook out of anyway before I went vegetarian. Just kind of got interested in cooking after college. And these are not gourmet meals, but they're easy and they get you used to the process of finding ingredients, buying them, which itself takes some work. The first time you start, if you've never cooked before and you have to look at an ingredient list and go buy those meals. I remember I saw a clove of garlic in a recipe, and I didn't know if that meant one little segment of the garlic bulb or if a clove meant that whole garlic bulb that has those 20 segments around it. So I just remember that those types of things, they take some time. It takes some getting used to. Just simple things like that, you've got to learn those things. But once you do, it becomes something that you get faster at it, and you learn to kind of make changes with it and do things quickly. So let's see. Just realized I'm going to run out of power at some point, which I did last time, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't prepare for that. But I'll wait. If we get close to that, I'll plug it in. Okay, so other stuff. I was talking about how to begin cooking. So any type of other cookbook that you use, and when I did it, I started using Rachel Ray. Just started adapting those meals and leaving out the meat. This is when I was vegetarian. I still would have the cheese in there. And it was very, very easy to transition that way and just remove that. I could put tofu or tempeh in instead of the meat. Would work totally fine. But you can also just go right to vegetarian or vegan books. There's nothing wrong with that either. And then maybe come back and some of your favorite cookbooks, you don't have to throw them out. You can kind of learn to do vegetarian, vegan cooking and then come back to those. And once you've had some experience with it, won't be that hard to adapt. So other favorites. I mentioned Isa Chandra Moskowitz. My favorite book of hers is not her most decadent or most indulgent, but good and I think the healthiest. It's called Appetite for Reduction, co-authored by Matt Ruscino, who co-authored the No Meat Athlete book. So that's a fun fact that you got there, and a nice common health link between the two. But that's where this tacos recipe came from that I love, the black bean and zucchini tacos. There are many, many more. The theme of that book, Appetite for Reduction, is that she's not just reducing like the fat and calories in meals, because that was part of it, but mostly it's about simplifying. It's about getting away from meals that take a whole lot of extra prep work just to replicate some certain non-vegan, non-vegetarian dish, or just that tastes really, really amazingly good, but that you've really got to work for, and that aren't necessarily the healthiest. So like Veganomicon was her big popular one that she did with Terry Hope Romero. That one to me is a little too complicated, a little bit too much fancy food in there. Appetite for Reduction kind of goes back the other way and really just nails the simple, good, healthy food. So that's a delicious cookbook. I would highly recommend it. Issa's got another one called Issa Does It. ISA is how you spell Issa, by the way. Issa Does It, like easy does it. That's another good one. Lots of good weeknight meals in there that are very fast. To me, that's sort of like the vegan Rachel Ray cookbook. So that's another one I would highly recommend. And what I do with that one now is just eliminate a lot of the oil. Or if it's like a really special day and I'm saying I'm going to eat oil, then I'll go for it. But you can always lessen the amount of oil that a recipe calls for if you're even thinking about oil at this point. What else? Indian recipes are great. And these aren't specifically vegan cookbooks, but like any kind of Thai cookbook or Indian cookbook, you're going to find lots of vegetarian recipes and lots of ways to make them vegan. So many of the Indian recipes will have ghee in them, which is clarified butter, but you just remove that and put in oil or no oil if you want, and you'll be totally fine. Same with Thai, very easy. There might be some fish sauce or fish things in there, but substitute tofu for the meat and skip the fish sauce, use some extra soy sauce or some other kind of Asian flavored sauce, and you'll be totally fine. Might not be the most authentic, perfect thing, but it will be delicious. And that's one of the really great things about eating this way, is it forces you to start eating this food that you might have ignored before this, right? That's kind of what I was. I was in this sort of food, I wouldn't say it was a rut. I was cooking American food. And then I went vegetarian and realized that I had never really bothered to even try cooking Indian stuff at home. I thought that was like just for restaurants to do, that you couldn't actually do that at home. Found that it wasn't that hard. It was actually quite easy, turned out delicious. Same with Thai food, same with Chinese food. So I learned to cook these different styles of food, and now I can kind of wing a meal like that. Like I can wing a stir fry pretty easily and make it turn out halfway decent. So that was a nice thing. Italian, there's a woman named Chloe Cascarelli. I'm going to try to confirm her name here for you and find the name of her cookbook. Apologize, I should have done this in advance. Chloe Cascarelli. I'll just give you the name of her book. That would be easier. Well, it's chefchloe.com, chefchloe.com. And let me just see if I can find her book name for you. This is not one that I own myself, by the way. Okay, it's called Chloe's Vegan Italian Kitchen. And I don't own it myself, but I have looked through it in the store and I thought, hey, I really need to buy that book because it looked delicious and I love Italian food. And I mean, there's going to be stuff in there that you don't want to eat for sure. Like that's not ultimately healthy in the long term for you. In any kind of book like that, where it's so much more about the food and the taste of the food than it is about the health. But you will learn over time, if you stay focused on health, even without being super deliberate about saying, okay, how can I now make this recipe healthier and this whole book healthier? What am I going to start doing here? If you just focus on healthy food, you'll start to eventually learn what it takes to make these kinds of foods healthier. But honestly, I don't suggest that you jump right to that stage. And I've said this a million times, I know, but it's really important. I think if you, at the very beginning, say, okay, I'm going to buy all these vegan cookbooks, and I've been an omnivore up to this point, I'm just going to now buy all these vegan cookbooks and start cooking from those. But I'm not even going to do what they say. I'm going to remove the oil, and I'm going to, I don't know, not use the nut butters or who knows what. But I'm not going to do the unhealthy stuff. I only want the healthiest possible food. Yes, you can do that, and maybe for a few people, maybe 1 out of 20, that will stick because it will resonate and it's exactly what they need at this point in their lives. For the other 19 out of 20, I think doing that, going that extreme, is going to make you kind of resent this whole thing and say, wow, this being vegan thing is really tough, and I really miss enjoying food like I used to. You can get there. You can get to that healthy point in a way more gradual manner. Be satisfied with being vegetarian this week. Be satisfied with being vegan next week, and be that for as long as you need to before you try to go healthier even. I just think if you go too much too soon, it just kind of becomes like you lose some of the enjoyment. And if you get there gradually, I think you don't really lose that much enjoyment because you really do get used to each phase. That becomes like your new set point, and you're totally happy at that set point. When you make a huge jump, it takes a while to really get used to that and for that to become comfortable and feel happy doing that, if you ever do. So those are some good books. I've mentioned some, I think, in our first webinar, so I don't want to repeat too much of that. But if you want like healthier, higher energy food than these ones I've mentioned, check out Brendan Brazier stuff or Rich Roll stuff. Rich Roll has the Plant Power Way out now. That's a really good, exciting cookbook with a lot of ingredients that are not the easiest things in the world to find, not the easiest things to maybe get used to. Like the smoothies Rich has, I mean, there's plenty of great stuff in there that's going to be delicious and very, very healthy, full of good, raw, superfoody ingredients, and that's wonderful. But like, if you're brand new to this diet, if making a smoothie to you means you've got to do all that, not just throw some strawberries and bananas and walnuts and water into a blender, then, you know, I get worried that it gets too complicated. But I do love Rich's stuff. I would highly recommend his book, even if it's not something that you do every day, but just kind of do when you feel like it, when you're inspired to eat really healthily. Same way with Brendan Brazier stuff. Thrive Foods is my favorite of his cookbooks. That's the most family-friendly, most non-weird food. And his stuff is very, very high energy, good food, a lot of it raw. I think it's all gluten-free or very, very low gluten, which to some people is important. And it's a great book for athletes. So that's another really highly recommended one, even if it's a little bit kind of far along for someone just jumping into this diet. So I would say do that later once you kind of gradually get there from what I consider to be a vegan diet that is more like a normal diet. Okay, so that's plenty of stuff about that. Happy to answer any sort of questions you've got about other cookbook recommendations or specific sites. I haven't mentioned Oshi Glows here, which is a good site by Angela Liddon. Have not mentioned Heather Crosby and her site Yum Universe, which is all gluten-free. These are good sites, good food on there for sure. Way better than the food that you see on No Meat Athlete, because what I make is way more about being practical and not so much about we're not searching for decadence or indulgence here. It's about what is going to get on the table really quickly, give you the nutrition you need, and taste moderately good in the process. That's kind of my MO when it comes to cooking. So that is that. That's kind of the food section of this. I don't want to go too long here without taking questions, so by all means, get them in when you're ready. I'm going to talk briefly about nutrition type stuff, which I hope isn't boring. I know a lot of people do really want to hear about nutrition type things. It's a little bit weird because what I've talked about a lot in this particular challenge is that we're not so focused on the healthiest possible choices. We're focused on what's going to be the easiest path to stay on that moves us eventually towards the healthiest possible choices. That's what this is about. So I don't want to go like off the deep end in terms of talking about superfood nutrition and the optimal all whole food, no oil diet, but I do want to kind of alleviate concerns or help people have more confidence that this diet really is perhaps the very best you can choose for your long-term health. I know it's very easy to be surrounded by people who are saying other things. And when you're new to this, and even when you've been at this a while, it's easy to listen to that and to hear someone, who knows who it is, that for some reason strikes a chord. Could be a coworker, could be a relative, could be someone who you just trust and look up to, maybe a mentor person at work or school or whatever. And they tell you, or they, take a second glance at your food and say, hey, that's not healthy, right? Because you're not getting this and this amino acids and this, or who knows what. And it's hard to not believe that stuff, right? And we should consider that stuff if these are people that we trust. But what I'm hoping to do here is at least give you another side so that when that happens, or if it already has happened, that at least you've got someone else, and I hope that you trust obviously you trust my stuff enough to join a program like this. I just want to give you that other side so that you've got other influences on you when talking about nutrition. So that it doesn't feel like that you're alone and out there just making these crazy life choices to eat this way when maybe you're sabotaging your health. No, it's not the case, and I can absolutely recommend some books as well that will definitely help you feel great about these choices. I'm going to plug in my computer to power. It's going to take 2 seconds, which I'll get up and you'll be staring at my doorknob. I'll mute the microphone too, so don't be alarmed that you hear no sound. It will take about 10 seconds, and then I will be back, and we'll talk about nutrition. Okay, I am back. Sorry about that. Sorry for the interruption. And again, I do apologize for this really weird setup of mine. My family has been through a nightmare the past month with our housing situation. We've been living in one room of a friend's house, and we're so grateful that our friends have taken us in during this time. But our house has been being worked on, being dried and made mold free apparently for, I think it's been coming on 4 weeks now, and it's just, we're in one room and it's very, very difficult. So anyway, it's a weird situation. I don't mean to make excuses at all for this, but not exactly the ideal environment to be doing one of these things, but that's all right. We're cool. We are carrying on, and hopefully the information is still good for you. So let's talk about nutrition quickly. If you've got questions, get them in. Don't feel like you need to wait for me to finish. When I think about nutrition, people want to know, we'll talk about protein because people, of course, want to know about protein. But I think maybe a slightly more informed question than where do you get your protein is, what is the nutrient mix that you like to go by? What's the nutrient mix you like to follow when you're eating? The one that I did for the longest time, and this was from Chris Carmichael's book. Chris Carmichael was Lance Armstrong's old coach, his cycling coach, his nutrition guy. And I read this book when I was training to qualify for the Boston Marathon before I went vegetarian. He recommends something that turns out is very easy to eat as a vegetarian, and I think is very close to what you should be eating. 65% carbohydrate, 20 to 23% fat, and 12 to 15% protein. So when I say percent, I mean percentage of total calories. So to actually do the work here, this would be another little simple thing for me to give you as a worksheet type thing. Just a way to figure out your nutrition percentages. We're not talking, you don't just take, like, let's say in a given meal, you have 10 grams of protein, 10 grams of fat, and 20 grams of carbohydrate. That's not 50% carbohydrate, because not all of these macronutrients have the same amount of calories in a gram, right? So you need to multiply by certain numbers. I don't want to go into it there here. I mean, it's 4, 4, and 9 for carbohydrate and protein, and then fat. Fat is 9. So you've got to multiply those grams by the calories per gram. And I don't want to lose people here with math stuff. And then take the percentage. And then take the percentage of the total calories that each one of those represents. I can put that in a little worksheet or something for you, which would be simple. But that's what I'm going for. 12 to 15% protein is the number that will be most interesting to people there, because everyone wants to know about protein. Another one, if that's kind of tricky to remember 70, 15, 15. And I think that's a pretty, I don't know, very kind of not extreme, but not exactly mainstream either. That's 70% carbohydrate, 15% fat, 15% protein. So for the protein number, if you look at, like, if you want to know grams per day and stuff like that, it's not hard. If you go to nomeatathlete.com and look up protein primer, Primer, you can find the formulas. My book also has them. Gives you exactly how much protein per day per pound of body weight that you have you're looking to get. For me, weighing like 140 pounds, I end up eating something like 40 to 50 grams of protein per day. It's not that much. I think it might be like a little over a third of a gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. So nothing really crazy, hard to get. Don't listen to people who tell you you need a gram of protein per pound of body weight or any more than that per day. That to me is crazy, and I think you're setting yourself up for some health problems if you're eating that much protein. Anyway, when I've talked to pro athletes, Rich Roll and Scott Jurek are not. I guess Scott's a pro. Rich is not a pro. Elite athletes, Rich Roll, Scott Jurek, Brendan Brazier. what they tell me always is around 15% of their calories come from protein. So I'm very, very comfortable with that number, even for athletes. And the funny thing about protein, I mean, is we think of all these different foods as carbohydrate food or fat food or protein food. And it seems like as a vegetarian, the protein foods aren't part of your menu anymore. Or as a vegan, they're not part of your menu anymore, right? Because we think of the meats, maybe some of the animal products like dairy and eggs as being the protein foods. And what we're left with is the carbohydrate foods or maybe the fat foods. I really feel like if you can call a food a protein or a fat or a carbohydrate, then you shouldn't be eating it. Food is going to have all those things in it. And if it has only one of those things, then it's probably not a whole food. It's probably not a food at all by a lot of people's standards. So what else to say? Oh, pasta, whole grain pasta, which I mentioned is something that we eat all the time. I don't have a problem with gluten. Some people do, fine. There's other kinds of pastas. But as an example, whole wheat pasta, if you look at a box of that and you do the math on the back of the box, you will see that it has 15% of its calories coming from protein. Most of the rest is carbohydrate, and you got a little bit of fat. So it's not, I'm not saying that pasta is the perfect food. I'm not saying pasta matches 70, 15, 15 or 65, whatever it was, 65, 20, 15. Not saying it matches that, but I'm saying if you look just at the protein number, it has 15% of its calories from protein. So this food that we've always thought of as the classic carbohydrate loading food that surely has zero protein in it actually has exactly the amount that you need, even if you were an elite athlete on a plant-based diet. So, I mean, no single example or line is going to put the protein concern to bed, right? It's so deeply ingrained in most of us. That's why the question is so common. It's why it's a joke now among vegans. We hear it so often. And I understand why, because we all think, and we all, I mean, once you become vegan, you think that less, but everyone is trained to think that animal food equals, or animal products equal protein. And yes, to a large extent they do, but nobody needs that much protein. Nobody needs to be eating that food 3 times a day or 2 times a day, or I think even once per week to get the amount of protein you need. So, I mean, when I say that, I should clarify, I don't think you need it once a week or once per month or any amount of time to get the amount of protein you need, because protein is in everything. There's nuts and beans, seeds, grains that I mentioned. These are very, very common foods. They're in everything. And I haven't even mentioned vegetables. If you just eat, there's people say this about broccoli. It's 50% of its calories come from protein, not 15, but 50. I don't like to use that example, and I don't like to, people like to make a point with that example. Like, hey, broccoli has more protein per calorie than steak. And sure, it's true, but nobody's going to get enough calories from broccoli to make it a significant or a really significant source of their protein. But what you can take from that example is that if you ate all your food from things like broccoli, right? If you just ate vegetables all the time and you ate enough of them to get enough calories, you'd be getting plenty of protein because they have protein in them. That's what a lot of these herbivore animals, some of the strongest, biggest animals on earth, are herbivores and eat grasses and leaves because they have the protein you need. Protein is not an issue if you're eating whole foods. Now, if you're eating processed food, then all this is kind of out the window, right? So like one example here is oil, and I'm not trying to rail against oil here or tell you to stop eating it, but it makes for a really good example here and adds, helps clarify this. If you're eating a bunch of food that has zero protein in it, then it makes it kind of easy to get lower than 15% of your total calories from protein, right? Because let's say half your food is total junk, and I hope nobody in here is eating that way. But let's say half of your calories are candy and soda, and let's even say olive oil is another big part of your diet. You eat lots of oil, you eat lots of candy, you eat lots of soda, and maybe 30 to 50% of your diet is actual real food. Then yes, maybe you're getting 15, 20% of your calories in that real part of your food from protein. But in the other half, the other 50% of your food that has 0% protein, that's going to drag that average down by half, right? Because you're averaging, let's say 20% with 0, and you cut it in half, so now you're down to 10%. Still is a workable amount of protein for people. You're not going to die from 10% protein. And in fact, T. Colin Campbell recommends 10% protein in his most recent book. And he's the author of the China study. A lot of people will really respect him. So 10% protein coming from him, that is meaningful to me, and interesting that he would recommend so low an amount. Just goes to show you, again, how when you get to these doctors, and especially vegan doctors, granted, it just seems like you don't need nearly as much as people think. So anyway, the point of that thing was not to rail against oil, but yes, to rail against junk food. If you're getting lots and lots of food that has zero protein in it, and that's all those foods I mentioned, soda, candies, oil, they do have pretty close to zero protein in them. Then you can see how it could possibly be to have not enough protein, right? Because you can, if a lot of your food has none of it, then that's going to weigh down the average of the other foods that you're eating. It does have a decent amount in it. So the point is, eat whole foods. If you eat nothing but whole foods or almost nothing but whole foods, you will not be protein deficient. It just doesn't happen. I've heard it said that there's been no case of protein deficiency that is not also a case of total caloric deficiency. So if you're just eating regular actual food, you're not going to become protein deficient. If that's not enough for you, take protein powder. And I mean, if that's not enough for you psychologically, mentally to feel confident about this, then add protein powder to your smoothie. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I don't use it because it's not a whole food, and I just like to get more. I'd rather have nuts and seeds ground into a powder, and that be my protein/fat powder that I add to my smoothie. But if it's convenient for you and it helps you to get the protein, or if it just gives you confidence to know that in your smoothie you're getting this, I don't know, 30 gram of protein scoop that you're adding in, then go for it, right? That's just like I was saying with the fake meats. It might not be the ideal perfect thing for your health, or maybe it's just unnecessary and costs you a little bit extra money, but gives you the confidence to stick with this and start to experience the results. And then one day, like me, you can stop having the protein powder and you realize that it was totally fine all along. That's what happened to me. Then great. I mean, I think it's a great tool to help you get there. And maybe you never want to get fully whole food and you're happy just having this little bit of protein in your smoothie in the morning. Wonderful. That's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that at all. But that's kind of what I have to say about protein. Actually, one more tip about protein, and that was that in the beginning for me, what I used to do was make sure I get a little bit of protein in everything that I eat. And if you're eating whole foods, of course, you're doing this. But I didn't really know that back then. So I had these 5 meals or snacks per day. And my rule at the beginning of being a vegetarian, because I was afraid of kind of becoming the pasta, all carbohydrate, all the time vegetarian, or the junk food vegetarian, my rule was I'm going to put a little bit of something that I consider to be protein rich into my food every single one of those meals. Only in the morning smoothie meal would that be protein powder. But then if it was the next meal, the almond butter or the hummus on kind of a snack, that would work on a bagel. To me, those things counted as protein rich because the hummus is made from chickpeas, which are beans, and the almond butter is, of course, made from nuts. That was good. If I had the salad, I'd put some seeds on there, maybe have some beans or some tofu on it. That would be the protein. That would be fine for me then. Other examples, I don't know. If I would eat fruit, I'd have a handful of nuts with it. Just wanted to have something protein rich all the time. And that helped me. It made me realize that I wasn't ever going, like falling into a rut of 6 meals in a row where I had nothing that had protein in it, or so I thought. So that's another useful tip. Might help you, might give you a little bit of confidence. Let's see. Kind of running out of time here. I don't want to go too long with this. Okay. Think more about micronutrients than macronutrients, right? So all the stuff I just talked about, that was macronutrients, right? The 65, the 15, 20%, all these stuff, that's macro. Okay, it's good to have that in those proper ranges, but they don't by any means need to be exact in those ranges. And in fact, you can get pretty extreme out of those ranges and be all right. What's important is eat the micronutrients. The micronutrients is the vitamins, the minerals, and the things that we haven't even discovered that we don't even know are in plants. There's a bunch of things called phytochemicals or phytonutrients that have been discovered, and these are in plants, but there are many types of these that we probably have no idea what they are yet, but nonetheless provide benefits from plant food. So if you look at, if you ever go to Whole Foods and you look in the salad bar, or if you just look up ANDI score, ANDI score, and there's a post on No Meat Athlete about this as well, so you can get this from my perspective. That post was about actually saving money on the high ANDI score foods. What ANDI score represents is measuring the nutrient density of foods, right? So this is basically nutrients per calorie. How many nutrients are you getting per calorie of that food? Dr. Furman is a guy who I really like. He's kind of one of the developers of this ANDI system. Maybe he's the developer. And his formula for health, and I really do think this is great, is that health equals nutrients divided by calories. So his idea there is that the more nutrients you can get, the more nutrition you can get, and he's talking about micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, things like that. The more you can get of that in the fewest number of calories, right? That's why we're dividing by calories, the better. So if it takes you 10,000 calories to get some fixed amount of nutrients, that's not nearly as good as if you can get that nutrients packed into 2,000 calories, because it's way less work for your body to do. It's way less stuff for your body to process and get rid of, but you get those nutrients still the same amount. So you want lots of nutrients, relatively low calories. You don't need to think about going on a diet. I'm not saying you need to restrict your calories, but by eating whole plant foods, you will automatically be doing that because they're just not as calorically dense as other foods are. So nutrient density, key concept, health equals nutrition divided, or nutrients divided by calories. That's Dr. Fuhrman's concept. Dr. Fuhrman, by the way, has some wonderful books that are really, really insightful and deep, and he's a good researcher, good scientist. He's not biased by ethical stuff, which I think is good, even though a lot of my motivation is ethical. I don't want to, from a scientist person or a doctor, I don't want them to be ethically motivated. I want to hear the science when they're telling me that a vegan diet is the best that I can be eating. It's really good to know that from someone who I know isn't motivated by ethics. They just want to find the healthiest thing for their patients and their readers. That's what they've arrived at. That, to me, gives me a lot of confidence. So Dr. Fuhrman, of his books, I would read Super Immunity first. Super Immunity. I would write that down. It's one of my very favorite health books in the world. Really, really kind of is eye-opening about this whole different view of nutrition, no longer in terms of carbohydrate, fat, and protein, but focusing on micronutrients and thinking about micronutrients per calorie, so that we want to minimize isn't the right word. We're not trying to get 0 calories. We're not trying to get super restrictive in terms of calories, but low calories, high nutrients. That's the formula. Even for an athlete, if you're getting packed nutrient-dense foods, you can be getting fewer calories than you were before and perhaps be healthier than ever before. Okay, a couple other things. I try to eat half of my vegetables cooked, half of them raw. I believe it's another Dr. Fuhrman tip, and it works well. It's easy. You don't have to think about getting the cooked vegetables. Most people get those automatically if you're eating a pretty typical vegetarian or vegan diet. It's the raw ones you need to think about. For me, if you eat the smoothie, as I mentioned, that was entirely raw. You get some vegetables in there, and then the giant salad at least once per day. Sometimes I'll have multiple salads. Usually only one time will I have the giant salad, and that's a lot of raw vegetables there. Sometimes when I have snacks, I'll dip raw veggies in hummus, or just eat raw vegetables. Honestly, sometimes I'll pull a carrot out of the refrigerator and eat it because it seems good, and I know it's good for me. So half cooked, half raw is good for me to live by. And let's see, whole foods. I mean, eat foods that are whole as much as possible. You don't have to do it exclusively. You can get there gradually as well. But to me, that's kind of the ideal that I want to get to, or want to be staying close to, eating food that doesn't really come in packages, unless you're talking about, produce that's been wrapped in cellophane for some reason. I'm okay with that. Pasta, a lot of people think that's processed, but it's really just whole wheat flour that's been ground up and put in a box. I'm fine with that too. But minimal ingredients in the packaged foods that you're buying. You don't want to be buying things that have a list of 10 or 15 ingredients on there, especially the ones you don't pronounce well, the ones that are hard to pronounce. We've all heard this tip before, but I really do think there's something to it. And not that much. That's honestly close to my philosophy of nutrition. Certainly I could talk at length about different nuances, and I've written about those things and talked about them on the podcast at much, much more length. But with a webinar like this, the point isn't to go into as much depth as we possibly can. It's pack an hour full of as much good information as I can. And that means selecting the information, right? So I'm giving you what I consider to be the most important, rather than making you wade through 10 hours of stuff to get to those most important details. This is the 80-20, as they call it, the 80% or the 20% of stuff that will get you 80% of the results. I think it's a really, really nice philosophy, getting the most impactful stuff as you can without going too deep into it. Q&A, though, is a perfect time to ask any sorts of questions you have that is about that remaining 80%. If we're talking about this, in this hour, being the 20% of content that will get you most of the results. The specifics, I've left those for Q&A. If you've got them, now is the time to chime in. I've got one from Bill right here that I will take first. Okay, very good question here, Bill. I'm glad you asked this. So Bill's question is, a paleo friend of mine, and paleo, of course, is the diet that is supposedly replicating the caveman diet. I don't have too many bad things to say about it. Ethically, I don't like it because it, of course, relies on a lot of animals. I don't think it's really accurate. There probably was no paleo diet. There was a wide variety of diets that people ate. And I think a lot of it is marketing, but they do encourage people to eat whole foods. They encourage people to not eat many dairy products. So for that reason, I kind of like it. I kind of think we are not that different from paleos, except that they eat meat and we don't, right? If you're a whole food vegan and you're next to a whole food paleo person, you two are the weird people among the whole rest of the country, right? Because you two are the ones who choose to eat whole foods and don't buy stuff in packages. And I think that's a lot in common there. Yes, there's the huge ethical difference of eating meat versus not. So I don't like that. But I think paleos have a lot of it right. But I think so do vegans, and I think you can do well in the short term with either one. In the long term, I tend to think that plant-based is going to be better than paleo. But who knows? Who knows for sure? Okay, paleo friend of mine, says Bill, says that vegetable proteins are inferior and vegans need to combine multiple vegetable protein sources in order to receive the fully needed set of amino acids. Is this a valid point? If yes, is this something you worry about? So great question, Bill. No, it is not a valid point. That was written in a book in the 1970s. The name of the book is escaping me. I might be able to look it up as I'm kind of talking or pausing here. But it was the first to assert that we needed to combine proteins or protein sources to get the full amino acid profile. Has been debunked many times since then. As it turns out, the body pools amino acids and hangs on to them, so you don't need to combine them in any single meal to get them, right? You can eat those foods over the course of a day, and you'll still combine those amino acids if your body, if that's what you need to do, right? Your body's going to do that. So no, so the point that is valid here is that yes, you do need to get all the essential amino acids, right? So there's a bunch of amino acids, many of them or some of them your body makes, a bunch of them, the essential ones, your body does not make. So you need to get those from food in order to get them at all. So this assumption then is that we need to get those all in the same meal, and that is that's the fallacy there. We do not need them all to be in the same meal. Further, Dr. Fuhrman, who I've just mentioned before, has a really good article about this, and I think in Super Immunity he mentions this exact thing. There's something called insulin-like growth factor 1 that is really good when your young kid, encourages you to grow, and that's a good thing. As it turns out, complete proteins that look a lot like animal products in terms of their amino acid profile, as it turns out, those stimulate the production of this IGF-1, this insulin-like growth factor 1. That, though, is linked to cancers. Once you get beyond being a kid and this growth is no longer a good thing, it turns out that there are links between things that cause growth like that and things that cause cancer growth. So Dr. Fuhrman highly advises you to look out for things like this. He's not saying avoid getting complete proteins in your diet. What he's saying is avoid sources of protein that mimic those of animal products. Processed soy protein is perhaps the worst of them at all. So the lesson here is don't eat processed soy protein, right? Don't do that anyway. Don't eat protein powder that is based on soy. Tofu, tempeh, much less processing goes on there. So I don't mind that because you're not getting tons of the protein there by itself isolated. You're also getting lots of carbohydrate and some fat as well when you eat those foods. So I mean, the point is, if your food, and I'm honestly not 100% clear on kind of the ramifications of this. Like I've seen Dr. Fuhrman say this. I've seen that he says these essential or these foods with a quote unquote complete amino acid profile mimic these animal foods that stimulate insulin-like growth factor 1. So therefore avoid the plant foods that also have that amino acid profile, processed soy being the worst of them. What I don't know and what I'd like to ask him is, does that mean we should avoid combining foods? Even like, is it not just that we don't need to do it? Should we actually be avoiding combining foods into this amino acid profile? I sense the answer is probably no. I think mainly what he doesn't want you to do is take in an isolated source of tons of that protein that is in like an animal protein, right? If you eat a steak and get 50 grams of complete amino acid profile, I think he's saying that's linked to insulin-like growth factor 1 production. Likewise, if you eat protein powder that has 30 or 40 grams of isolated soy protein that also mimics that amino acid profile, then you're doing something that is perhaps just as bad for yourself. So anyway, I wish I could remember the name of the book, Bill. I think Matt Ruscigno even mentions it in the No Meat Athlete book when he talks about this myth of needing to combine proteins. So I'm not saying I'm trying to sell you my book here, but it is there. The specific book, and it's just escaping me right now. I apologize for that. But good question. Okay. So here's one from Celeste. Isn't tofu processed food? Yeah, I mean, some minimal processing goes into that. Even the morning smoothie that I have is processed food because that's you're blending it up and you're doing the work that your body would otherwise need to do. I like to move towards processed food. It's kind of it's what I hold up as sort of my ideal that I want to keep moving towards. That's okay to me, knowing that I'm never quite going to get there, as long as I'm keeping that in mind. And with every meal that I eat, there's kind of how far away is this from that line? So I eat tofu now and then, probably, I don't know, once every 2 weeks is probably about as often as I eat a tofu or tempeh, not just for the processing issue, but because of the soy issue. People talk about soy being controversial and potentially, who knows, doing all kinds of different things that it's accused of, often unfairly. But as I said before, when a food is that controversial and when there are smart people on either side of an argument, to me, that means there's some merit on both sides of this thing. So I don't think soy is dangerous, but the fact that a lot of people who are smart do and don't, that makes me say I'm not going to base my diet on soy products, right? If that's a potential risk, even one that I don't think is there, it just doesn't make sense to me to eat that food all the time. So why not, when there are so many other good foods, just limit that to being something that you eat now and then when you make a stir fry or when it's convenient or who knows what. But yeah, so certainly that's a processed food. Oil is a processed food. That's why I don't eat it at home. But when I go out to eat, I still do eat it because I enjoy it and it's good. So I'm not by any means, and I know it's easy for me to sum up my diet philosophy in saying that it's all about whole foods and that's what you want. But I'm not trying to make the case that I only eat whole foods. I should mention though, tofu and tempeh are the forms of soy that I often eat, or often being once a week, once every 2 weeks. They are nothing like the amount of processing that goes into, say, soy protein isolate or textured vegetable protein. Tofu and tempeh have been made for, I don't know if it's hundreds or if it's thousands of years, but it's very easy to make. There's nothing crazy technological going on. So, I mean, here, it sounds like I'm defending it, and you can defend almost anything if you want. So I'm not trying to say that it is not processed food by any means. Certainly some processing goes into that more than some of the other foods I eat. But do it now and then. And honestly, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, it's not like you're sucking the protein out of the soybean and just using that. There's plenty of carbohydrate and there's fat in tofu as well. Oil to me is a little bit different than something like that because you are literally taking just the oil out and you have only the fat. You've removed the protein and carbohydrate. With tofu and tempeh, you've still got those other things in there. So I think they're not as bad in that way. But one could argue otherwise, for sure. Okay, another one from Celeste. Appreciate the questions. You'll keep them coming if you've got them, everyone. Also, a recipe I was going to make called for hemp tofu. Whole Foods didn't have it. Have you ever eaten it? And if so, where do you find it? No, I've never eaten that, and I've never even heard of that. There's a company in Asheville, which I live in Nashville, North Carolina, and there's a company here that is a local tempeh company, and they make tempeh out of black beans. They make tempeh out of, obviously, soybeans, because everyone does. That's what tempeh really is. So when I say they make it out of black beans, it's not technically tempeh anymore, but they're using the tempeh process on black beans instead of soybeans. And anyway, several other bean varieties they make it. I don't know if they've made, I think they did. They made a hemp tempeh and they called it Hempeh, which is a perfect name. So I doubt that's what you're talking about, but it's possible that maybe there was some confusion there and actually they meant hemp tempeh or Hempeh. But I doubt that would be in a recipe, so I don't really think that's the case there. So no, I don't really know that. Don't know the answer to that one. I apologize. Never heard of hemp tofu in my life. All right, another one from Bill. It says, the same paleo friend cautioned me about not getting enough sodium with vegan foods. Is there any risk of deficiency if you don't add any to your food? Is there a minimal amount of sodium one should shoot for? No, that is also not a good argument at all. Yeah, Furman, again, is a really good guy to read. You should absolutely read Furman's book, Super Immunity. It will cover a lot of this stuff for you and give you some ammunition if that's what you're looking for. So if you listen, people didn't add sodium to their food for tens of thousands of years, or add salt to the food, I should say, because that's what we actually add to our food rather than sodium, even though that's mostly what it is. What they did was just eat food, and that sodium levels are present in the regular whole foods that people ate for tens of thousands of years and that we still eat. I guess you could make arguments about soil quality and things like that, but they don't have much. I don't really honestly know if animal products have a lot of sodium in them. I don't know. I'm not sure about that part, but I can answer much more about this. Typical food people eat, like when they were talking about just a typical maybe gatherer hunter diet or just the vegetables in the ground, would be like 500 to 18 milligrams of sodium that you would get in a regular diet without adding anything to it. Quarter teaspoon of salt, though, has 500 milligrams of sodium, and the USDA, the RDA, the recommended daily allowance for sodium, is like 3,500 milligrams. So we're talking about 5 to 7 more times than you would just eat in a typical diet that our ancestors ate. So to me, that is scary that anyone would say 3,500 milligrams of sodium is fine and good, when if you look back to the way we ate for the longest amount of time, and your paleo friend, as a paleo who bases all their arguments on how we ate for the longest amount of time, should know this, that the modern diet, vegan or not, if you're adding salt to your food or eating processed food or food bought in stores or restaurants that has lots of salt added to it, has many, many times more sodium in it than what is in just a basic gatherer-hunter diet. So I'm not really sure where that argument comes from the paleo friend, but I would be concerned about getting too much sodium. That is a concern of mine. I've worked very hard in the past 2 years, probably since I really got into Furman, to reduce that amount of sodium that I eat. And that means getting away from table salt, especially getting away from salt in cooking. So I've basically stopped using it in cooking, because an interesting example I heard was that when you add, that bread and potato chips per serving, I don't know if it's per calorie or per serving, have the same amount of salt in them. The difference is that the potato chip salt is added after the cooking, the bread salt is added in the cooking. So when you do it in the cooking, it kind of more becomes part of the food and you don't taste it as much. So if your goal then is to reduce the sodium in your diet, then one of the tricks would be don't use it in the cooking part and just save it to the end when you can really taste it, because it's right there on the surface of the food. So that's been something I've been doing, and I've really come a long way. I used to love salt and eat a lot of it, but then I read about risks of links to some stomach cancer and things like that, and that concerned me. So I've started to get away from salt for that reason, as well as high blood pressure. Right, a lot of young people say, I don't have high blood pressure, not a problem. I'm just eat all the salt I want. But that's a big part of the reason that people eventually get high blood pressure, is because they eat sodium when they're younger all the time and say, oh, I don't have high blood pressure, I can just keep doing this. So I do not think sodium is a good thing at all. Certainly not something that I would try to get more of in my diet. If you're an athlete, yeah, you got to think about it when you're running or moving for electrolyte purposes. But no, never have I thought about making sure I get enough sodium. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. I do not want to get too much. Iodine is an interesting, I don't think this is what he meant, but it could have been. Iodine is something that is potentially deficient in vegan foods, and it is something that is added to salt very often to help us get it, not help vegans, but just help people in general get salt. And when you go vegan, you give up a big iodine source, which is dairy products, because it's thought they pick it up from the machinery that is, or the cleaning products that are used to clean the dairy processing machinery contains iodine. It's thought that dairy food picks up the iodine from that and then supplies it. So when you go vegan, especially if you kind of go towards like the sea salts and these ones that don't, they say right on the package, this salt does not contain iodine, an essential nutrient. So if you've cut out a lot of your iodine from your salt and your dairy products are gone, then potentially you could become deficient in iodine. And that's actually in the multivitamin that I take, is a little bit of iodine, just to make sure that I get the, cover the bases there. So it could be that your friend is referring to iodine and not sodium, and that he or she is mistaken and saying the wrong thing, since they're kind of both in salt when it's fortified with this iodine. But I can't say for sure there, Bill. Okay, this one from Yvonne says, do you eat fermented foods regularly, like soy yogurt, kombucha, sauerkraut, miso, kimchi, etc.? No, I wouldn't say regularly. Regularly would not be the right word for me. I like all of those foods. I don't really like soy yogurt, but the others, I do enjoy all of them. Kombucha is a fermented tea that is very popular in places like Asheville, but a lot of Whole Foods and other places it's catching on for sure. Sauerkraut, of course, everyone knows what that is. Miso, the soybean paste, and kimchi, which is fermented cabbage. I don't really know the difference between sauerkraut and kimchi, to be honest. I know what they taste different. I know how they taste. I don't know the how they're made differently. But anyway, yeah, I think those foods have some value, with the gut bacteria stuff and the probiotic issue. I understand that. I understand a lot of people care about that and add them to their diet. I don't really know. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that it's a huge. I think the problem is when people are taking antibiotics or eating lots of things that destroy gut bacteria. Heavy drinking of caffeine or alcohol could do this, and many other things as well. Antibiotics, of course, what the doctor will give you, and I haven't gotten those in a long time just because I don't really think it's usually the best way to treat something. But this is not a medical webinar, and you don't want one from me because I am not that informed with doctor medical stuff. But no, I honestly think you eat mostly whole foods. You eat lots and lots of plants and fresh and raw stuff. I think over time your body is going to do what it needs to do with its gut bacteria. Possible that eating those things for a while, because I think it does take a while. That stuff can get messed up very quickly by like antibiotics, will just kill everything apparently, and takes a while to replenish. So I mean, it could be that you could wait years of eating on a plant-based diet to get stuff replenished. Or maybe you could do one of those things that would kind of jumpstart the process for you and get you like a head start by taking in however many billion, whatever it's called, live active cultures, I don't know, or live active cells. Anyway, I'm talking about something that I don't know anything about, so I shouldn't continue. But no, the answer to that is no, I do not, and I think it can be beneficial. I haven't really seen that much that says it is absolutely required or needed for health. But now and then, I mean, go for it. Certainly not going to hurt you. Okay, what vegetables do you prefer? Oh, sorry. This is also from Yvonne. What vegetables do you prefer, raw or cooked? And do you have any source? Don't really think about that. I mean, it's quite probable that certain vegetables will hold up to cooking in terms of their nutrients will stay intact through cooking better than others will. But I don't know, and I've never done that amount of research. For me, it's more about what is kind of palatable and good to be raw and cooked. So very, very easy to eat lettuces and leafy greens and things like that in a raw state. Carrots, though, I don't really like that much raw because, I mean, they're okay and they're crunchy, but like I can eat a carrot, but like on my salad, if I have to have a carrot on my salad, a whole carrot chopped up, it just seems to make every bite take forever. And you got to chew a lot. It's a lot of work. So like having carrot on my salad slows me down eating it and makes me not want salad as much. So I tend not to have it there for that reason. Same with something like broccoli. Like broccoli I can do as a raw dipping food in hummus, but if I have a bunch of big broccoli stalks on my salad, I'm not going to really enjoy that. It's going to be a lot of chewing. Some of those foods, I mean, broccoli is one that even like raw foodists will generally say they kind of stay away from broccoli except for like the very tips of the florets on top of it, because it's hard to process. It's very hard to break down that that big fibrous stem. So in that case, I would say broccoli might be one that's better cooked, and that's probably a good rule of thumb. It's not one that I necessarily follow. I'm not going to try to pretend that, but the more fibrous, the harder to chew it is. Chances are that not just the more enjoyable to eat it will be if you cook it, but perhaps your body can actually use it a lot more and not have to go through a ton of work to get those nutrients out of it if you actually cook it and break down some of it for your body. So that's kind of all I have to say about that one. I don't know. I mean, yeah, like just if they're enjoyable and good to eat raw, like so many leaves are, then I do it. But if they're not, or if it's just not that convenient, then I tend to get them from cooking. So no, not really that much. But I mean, also with a salad, you can get lots of variety, right? I mean, you're never going to cook cucumbers, or very rarely would you cook cucumbers. So chop that stuff up on a salad, of course. Bell peppers, bell peppers are great cooked or raw. They can be added some variety to a salad. So it's not like I eat the same salad every day or the same dinner every day. It mixes, and I think, there's a lot of flow back and forth between which ones are raw and which ones are cooked. But I'm sure if you looked up a raw food site, you could find some information about that, like which ones are the best to eat in cooked state rather than raw. And also, don't forget the thing about cooking methods. Like certain cooking methods will destroy a lot more of the nutrients than others will. Like I believe steaming vegetables is much worse than like roasting or cooking in a pan. I don't know if it's the heat level is much higher with steam, but anyway, it can destroy a lot more of the enzymes and nutrients, things like that. Okay, another one from Yvonne. Says, do you eat beans in each meal, or is it enough once a day, eating cereals and greens along the day? Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't need to do that in every meal. I try to get about a cup of beans per day, or a can. A can is like a cup and a half, but often we make them at home as well. So in the cup to cup and a half range of beans per day is about what I aim for, but it's not at all strict. Like there are days for sure that I don't eat any beans, and there are probably days when I will happen to have them a giant serving in lunch and dinner and get more than a cup and a half. So no, there are very few foods that I would eat in every meal, and I don't really think that any food. To me, it seems kind of strange that you would eat any one food in every single meal that you eat, just because of the way people used to eat and the way that food was sort of scarce. I mean, I don't know, when you talk about whether you're talking about meat or whether you're talking about like wheat, which is another thing that a lot of vegans and anyone are guilty of, is eating wheat in every single one of our meals. This is a big, the gluten-free rage is everything these days, and everyone's into that. People ask about that, and I don't think gluten is a problem, but I don't think you should be eating wheat every single meal. And in the United States, especially, people do that all the time. It's very easy to eat wheat all day long. So yeah, I don't think you would want to eat beans in all of your meals. I'm not saying it would hurt you. I don't really know. It might be a lot of fiber, and it might be some gas issues, but I don't know. So once a day, totally, that's good for me. Could be 0 times a day, could be twice a day, but on average, a cup of beans is about what I'm probably getting. And that's cooked. Once they're cooked, they are a cup size. I wouldn't start with I'm not saying I eat a cup of dried beans today, because that would be much larger. Okay, and then another one from Bill says, do you believe in food combining? AKA only eating certain foods together at a meal for better digestion. Shoot, I don't know what happened. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. Bill, that's a really good question. And I like the idea of it. I can't say I've ever actually experienced any benefits from it. And there are different schools of thought around it. I've heard you shouldn't eat concentrated protein and concentrated carbohydrate in the same meal. I've heard you should really only eat fruit by itself and not with other stuff, because it will almost ferment in your stomach. And I don't think that's true at all, but that's the rationale. I've also heard that you shouldn't drink a lot of water with your meals, because it will dilute the contents of your stomach then. And so then your digestive juices go to work, and they are diluted by all the water in there. So it takes a lot more energy, a lot more of the digestive enzymes and things to actually do the job of digesting your food. A raw food friend of mine told me that most of those things do not matter, but the water one does. And I honestly don't know. I have no idea. I don't know if anybody really knows how valid that is. So I tend to not drink that much water with meals. I kind of got used to just enjoying the meal and not needing to drink water every single bite of food I take. But I don't know. I mean, it's going to be an energy benefit you're talking about. I don't think there's going to be much other benefit to health or anything from food combinations. But I don't know for sure. It's an interesting area to me. One thing that I have had, it's hard to say because so many variables change at once, but I did this thing last summer when I tried a fruitarian type diet. You've probably heard me mention this type of diet, but we ate nothing but raw fruit, inspired by this guy, Michael Arnstein, who was one of the very best 100-mile runners in the world. He is known as The Fruitarian. You should look him up, thefruitarian.com. Michael Arnstein. Great 100-miler, has records, has run 100 miles in, I think, under 13 hours, which is a crazy, under 8-minute pace for 100 miles. And he does it all on raw fruits and vegetables, not even really many nuts and seeds, almost entirely raw fruits and vegetables. So anyway, he does this thing called the Woodstock Fruit Festival every year. My wife and I went to it. I was a guest. I spoke at it. So we got to go, and we really loved it. It felt amazing while we were eating that way. And then came back. And one of the things that I learned there was this concept of mono meals. And this I buy more than everything else. And it's kind of based on theory of how we once used to eat. And it's also based on kind of a theory of like, it makes sense that this would eat. And I'll explain it. When they say mono meals, they mean eating meals that are only composed of one single food. This will get weird, of course. I mean, what I'm talking about is like eating a watermelon for your lunch, and that's it. Or for your breakfast, maybe that's a little bit less weird. But just eating one single food and filling up on that food. So that, and the point is that your body then only has to digest that one food. So apparently, and I don't claim to understand this, all different types of enzymes and things are required for different types of foods. So some of them counteract each other and all kinds of things like that. So when you have just one food in there, you're really limiting and simplifying the amount of stuff in there that needs to be digested, the amount of different things, and your body can efficiently go to work and digest it. So I will say that when I was eating that way, I felt really good. I was eating this raw fruitarian thing and did it for like a month and felt amazing in terms of my energy levels. And I got really into that idea of just eating these mono meals. So I would eat a whole bunch of peaches for a lunch or a watermelon for breakfast. And it was weird. I'm not going to try to argue that that's like what I think is a healthy long-term diet. It might be. I don't really know. It's one of those things where it's controversial enough that I would be scared to actually do it for a long term. But I liked it. It was a fun experiment, and I felt amazing. So how much of that had to do with the mono meals, and how much had to do with the fact that I was eating only raw fruit and vegetables, and how much of that had to do with the fact that I had changed my diet, right? That I had gotten this drastic shift in my diet, and suddenly I was getting all kinds of new foods in there. Potentially, if I was a little bit low in something before, now that my diet had totally changed, maybe I was getting way more nutrients that I'd been missing before. Who knows? So I'm hesitant to say that mono meal issue, the combining of foods, or really not combining, just eating one food at a time, that was the reason. But, in my head, it kind of felt like maybe that was. And the historical reason for this, that one might argue, maybe not historical, but, in the paleo kind of viewpoint, thinking about how people probably ate before, we weren't combining foods into these intricate, luxurious meals and killing an animal and then getting oranges from the orange tree and making it all into this multiple course meal. I think what it was if you found an orange tree, you ate oranges until you were full, and then maybe even beyond that because you didn't know when you would have that opportunity again. So the mono meal to me kind of makes sense, right? Like if food was scarce and you found a food source, you ate it until you were full. So I think we probably did eat a lot of just single food meals, and maybe our digestive system has evolved to do best that way. I honestly don't know. I have not seen any sort of real science about this, so that's why I'm hesitant to recommend it. I don't think it can hurt you that much, or maybe at all. I don't know. So don't know the answer. It's interesting to me. I would love to find an answer and find a way to combine food that suddenly made me feel twice as much energy, or maybe just not feel tired, not feel like I had to digest, which is very simple. That'd be wonderful. The total raw mono meal thing is the closest I've gotten to that, but I honestly have no idea how much of that is just kind of placebo or other factors. But great question. Okay, this one from Yvonne. And let's get to our last one, which probably is good because it's 9:30 now, so we'll wrap it up after this one. She says, my family accepted pretty well this new vegan life and are joining in most of the meals, but they still use some things to cook, like chicken bouillon for rice. Should I tell them already that is not pretty vegan right now, or wait a couple weeks? Yeah, this is a really, really good question. This is what next week's webinar will be all about, this type of issue. There's no right answer to this. It is up to you and your judgment and how you feel, your relationships with those people, what type of people they are. But I do totally understand your I guess, hesitation. Let's see. I'm just trying to think what would be the thing to do here. So for anyone who's listening to this, Yvonne, you probably already understand the issues here, but when people are going to some length to help you, right? Cook vegetarian for you, do what they can. But, and I don't know, Yvonne, if this is sort of a typical, traditional thing in your family, if rice is a big thing from your name. It sounds like, Latina heritage. And I'm guessing rice is a big part of that. And I'm guessing chicken bouillon in rice is the way you cook rice, right? So to say, thank you for all the effort you're putting in to help me be vegetarian and vegan. But actually, there's one more thing that you've done for your whole life and is such a part of heritage, actually isn't vegan. So please don't do that anymore. You can see how that kind of rubs people the wrong way. So I honestly don't have a good answer for you there. I think it is up to you. I think eventually, if you feel strongly about this vegan thing, then you're going to want to get to the point where you have dealt with that issue, right? So at some point, the time is right to deal with that. I don't know quite when it is or what it is. If it were me, and this is the best way I can answer knowing, is if it were me in your shoes, I would maybe avoid it, just kind of, if it's like a self-serve thing, just not serve myself rice. Or I would eat small amounts of it, just sort of grease the wheels and not ruffle feathers right now. Be grateful for people, understanding that you are a vegetarian or vegan, doing what they can without thinking it. At some point, and I think if we're going to try to be vegan next week and you want to experience that and really be it, then yeah, I mean, you do need to say something about it or just find a way to not eat it. Personally, probably what I would do is sort of just not really eat it, or like casually in another conversation remind people that no, you don't eat chicken bouillon anymore. I don't know, so that maybe somebody overhears that and like, oh, okay, then I won't do that next time, or I won't serve her rice next time. Yeah, I don't know. That's my best advice there. I would definitely think about this stuff over the next few weeks or over the next week to get ready for the next week's webinar, and I'll see if I can come up with a better answer for you. It maybe you've already have done it by then, but I don't know. It's been a while since I've dealt with that, and there's a podcast episode that I did. I'm gonna try to look it up really quick for you. That really went into, Doug and I had a good discussion about this sort of topic. And it turned out there were a lot of situations actually where he said that he had recently eaten, like, I don't know if it was a fish thing. I think Worcestershire sauce that has fish in it, which not a lot of people don't know that. And he ended up eating it. And he said to him, he felt like even if his goal was just advance the vegan movement, right? If it wasn't so much about remove awkwardness with friends, but just do what's best for this movement, he decided that him eating that would turn these people, would serve not to turn these people off of veganism, right? These people who are trying to cater to him, trying to be friendly, and they make this one tiny mistake of putting Worcestershire sauce. Are you going to bring it up? Are you going to not eat that food because they made that little tiny mistake that has you eating a minute amount of animal products? Some people, yes, absolutely, they won't touch animal products because and wouldn't in that situation consider eating that. But I can totally understand why he would think about that in that case, because you don't want to. That would totally turn someone off if you said, "No, I'm not eating that. Thank you for trying, but it's not good enough. I'm not eating that." I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. It's a very tough situation. I'm happy not to have been in that recently. By the way, the podcast I looked up is called "How Not to Be the Punchline of the Vegan at a Dinner Party Joke." So if you look at No Meat Athlete Radio on iTunes, you should find that title in the list. And we had a long discussion about these types of topics, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Okay, great question, though. I sympathize with you. That is not an easy thing. I don't know. I mean, if you were like a super hardcore vegan and very, very, very serious and angry in some way, and you're going to spread this message and you're doing it as a protest, then your decision is easy, right? You want as many people as possible to see this, and you want to be as loud and vocal and visible as possible. Then the decision is make a visible, loud stand that says, I'm not eating this because it has chicken in it. I just don't think that's the best way to spread this message. So we have a tougher decision of what's the right thing to do in that situation to not offend people, and at the same time be true to your principles. And it's very, very difficult there to figure out what to do. Once you become vegan for a while, though, I think people figure it out, and they've heard you talk about it, and you just get better at avoiding the situation somehow or skirting around it or whatever, and you end up, because it's been very, very, way long time since I've eaten animal products, even with such a kind of lenient approach to how I would approach a situation like that. Good question. All right. And then one more from Bill here who just says, thanks for the guidance. Very new to this. Yes, everyone has an opinion. Absolutely. Everyone becomes a nutrition expert, which is funny, but they do. Yeah, no one says a word about a meal of 20 McNuggets, large fries, and a quart of soda. Give up meat, and everyone's concerned for your health. That is absolutely how it is, and it is reassuring to think of something like that, right? At least it's sad that that's the state of affairs, but yeah, when that's the standard or the normal thing to do is eat a huge plate of buffalo wings and fries and soda or McNuggets or burgers, and like, yeah, and you give up meat and people suddenly think it's crazy and you're gonna die now because you don't have enough protein. So I don't know, but it's when I get in those, and I every now and then still have those, it's just because it's so ingrained in us that we're supposed to eat this one particular way and not this other way. When I think those little thoughts, and I remember stuff like this, and like, I haven't been to a fast food restaurant in, I don't know, 5-6 years now. It just makes me feel very, very happy and know that I'm on the right path. So anyway, thank you all for your questions. Appreciate the feedback, Bill. And I will see you all next week. Good luck with this first week of official vegetarianism if you're on the omnivore to vegan track. So good luck. Happy Labor Day. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.